Okay, so welcome to the final panel for this forum on 2050 is now climate transitions innovators. So let me pass the floor to my moderator, Kwan, co-chair of the Hong Kong Green Finance Association Real Estate Working Group and head of sustainability and risk governance at Linked Asset Management. So please, can I pass the floor to you, Calvin? Please. Microphone.
Tracy, thank you very much. So we have Francis on here as well. Good afternoon, everybody. It is truly my pleasure to be able to moderate this session. It's not every day that I get to sit down with 6 truly innovative experts in sustainable finance. It's also very rare that I get to control the questioning. So I'm going to be a little selfish during this session because there's so much for me to learn from all my 6 panelists up here. But bear with me. Hopefully you'll get some information from this as well. I promise you there is time for Q&A, but that's assuming that I get to ask all my questions and get them answered first. Without further ado, the session today is on climate and innovation. And that's going to be, hopefully, you've heard a lot today about sustainable finance, carbon, what the market is doing, rules, regulations that are emerging. What we're hoping to do is close today's successful event by piquing your curiosity on what's coming up. How can we prepare for the future? So I'd like to introduce the panel. They're all on my left. They're all sitting out of order as well. So let me first start. I have Jean-Marc Champagne, who is head of environmental finance and bankable nature solutions at WWF. You've been based in Hong Kong, working on impact-oriented green financial products and initiatives, including the Climate Impact Asia Fund, and you're sitting on the Investment Advisory Committee as well. Following Jean-Marc, we have Bill Kentrup, who has been involved in environmental protection and infrastructure markets in Asia. Most recently, Bill, you've been working in the blockchain field to help Allinfra to establish and promote the application of blockchain technology in infrastructure and environmental asset financing. Next to him is Bill McQuay, founding partner of GPS McQuay LLP, a leading Hong Kong law firm committed to ESG initiatives. On his side job, I guess it would be, you're committed and an influential figure in green and sustainable finance. You're VP and special advisor to chairman on the HK Green Finance Association, and also a Hong Kong representative and steering committee member of the UN Financial Centers for Sustainability Network. Directly next to him is Ellie Tang, currently head of sustainability at New World Development Company Limited. She's responsible for integrating sustainability into the group's business operations and risk management with an aim to deliver an artisanal living experience. On the screen, you can also see Francis Chen. There he is, senior manager at Industrial Bank, working on green finance. His responsibilities include environmental and social risk management, and he's been managing investor engagement of Industrial Bank's over 100 billion RMB of onshore and offshore green bonds. And then lastly, and not least, do I really need to introduce you? Tracy Wong Harris, head of sustainable finance for Greater China and North Asia at Standard Chartered, focusing on the bank's sustainable finance strategy. You are truly a leader in green and sustainable finance. I will leave it at that. Thank you very much. So, I'd like to set the scene. And before we get there, Ben, can I ask you to set the scene on this discussion for today? Because there's been so many changes recently with COP26, regulatory standards coming out or potential regulatory standards coming out. Can you help us frame the discussion for today? What should be on top of mind for me over the next 3 to 5 years?
Sure, thank you, Calvin, and everybody. Always a great pleasure to be at our annual forum and to be in the company of such leaders in green finance and sustainability. I'd just like to add that, Tracy's aura is so great, in fact, which is why she has to sit about 10 feet away from the rest of us. In terms of setting the scene, I think it's worth just reflecting on the fact that, for most businesses, climate transition is very new. And whilst momentum has been gathering since Paris 2015 and in Hong Kong really since 2017 or so, you know, the transition has primarily been focused on the financial sector and policymakers for obvious reasons. And yet it feels in the last year or so that all businesses have sort of woken up at some point, literally in the last 12 months, not just to climate issues, but to the fact that they're going to need to do something to be competitive in the future or even to stay in business, okay? And this is a transition that affects all businesses, whether they like it or not. And so what I'd like to explore just initially is just a couple of reasons, I suppose, behind the sudden surge. You know, why are we all talking about climate transition? So firstly, for me anyway, I think it's likely a direct consequence of the national net zero commitments that were set in Hong Kong and of course in mainland China over the course of last year. Those commitments remind us that, you know, whether corporates choose their own net zero strategy or not, the policy commitments made by the governments apply to all of us, which means we're all going to have to do something about it, okay? It means that all of our businesses are going to be impacted. The second, I think, reason for the surge is that we're benefiting from a sort of global momentum, increased momentum, particularly this year on the back of things like the IPCC report and also COP26. So with regards to the IPCC report, I think it's quite important because it represents consensus opinion and warns us all of the grave risks and reminds us that of the great urgency for governments and businesses to come together to take more climate action at scale and speed. And then as for COP26, well, I think the poll in the previous the panel session, you know, indicated that people here felt sort of generally positive about the COP26. And I think the key themes were touched on there and needn't be repeated here. And of course, they can be found easily online. I think a key indicator, if not theme, from COP26 is the fact that increasingly the momentum is being generated by private sector, by regional activities, less so by governments, less so by sort of national leaders, which in my mind at least is a good thing because it's climate action, not climate words that we need after all. And so, Calvin, in terms of what you can expect in the near term, I think much of the same. I think more of the same. I think we're going to see I think we need to sort of fasten our seatbelts. I think we're going to see, you know, more at speed, more scale, definitely more regulation. And while that's good generally, I think for a lot of business, it's going to be hard because it's hard to get your arms around the issues. It's hard to translate or figure out how these very important and sometimes extremely technical issues are relevant to your business, okay? And I think much will depend on the nature of the business, much will depend on the sector. You know, for my business, a law firm, and if you don't mind, I'll just correct you, it's called Ben McQuay & Co. The one you read out was the old one. So what we founded the firm, you know, intentionally to support companies in their transition. And we do that by combining law and ESG and innovation. Okay, and there's some key, I guess, areas where we hope to be able to add value to our clients, you know, in the coming 2 or 3 years or so. Firstly, the fact that every business is going to have to change, the fact that every business plan is going to have to change, the fact that probably every strategy is going to have to change. There are all sorts of legal implications that directly flow from that, from the transition. Connected to that, I think, is the fact that the transition actually can create tremendous opportunity. Okay, there's value to be generated, not just sort of mitigation outcome value, but real financial value, revenue value. And so another area that we're expecting to be, you know, busy, focusing on, I guess, in the coming years is helping clients as they sort of develop their transition, help with that strategy. How do you turn what it seems to be, at least as far as the board and the CFOs are concerned, pure cost into opportunity? and revenue generating opportunity, marketing opportunity, competitive advantage opportunity. Another area, and I will hurry up, is of course regulation. And we heard from Ashley earlier, you know, we're in a very unusual situation. Normally we like less regulation, but in relation to the sort of climate transition, we want more regulation. I call it regulate to accelerate. We're going to see more regulation. We're going to see more global alignment amongst regulators in areas such as taxonomies, disclosures and reporting standards, certainly anti-greenwashing legislation as well. All of these have sort of compliance and therefore liability issues associated with them. We're also going to see more regulation to help direct capital to green projects. We're going to see regulation to help develop carbon markets and the all-important carbon price on an accelerated basis. We're also going to see regulation, or rather we need regulation to see more green investment opportunities. We need a wider range of investment opportunities to as broad a range of investors as possible. This is where it kind of gets into domain of Bill and others, because we're talking blockchain, we're talking new asset classes, we're talking new distribution channels. And of course, we need to tap into or be able to access the retail investor market. So I think there's an awful lot coming, and we have to balance all of that against the fact that we're all challenged by the sort of the need to build capacity. There's still not enough talent in the market for what we need to do now. We really need to prioritize developing talent in order to have a fighting chance of doing what we need to do in the next 3 to 5 years. I'm going to stop there.
Ben, thank you very much for that. I think you've actually touched on all the points for other panelists as well. So absolutely great for setting the scene for that. If I could summarize all of that into a few key words that I picked up here, it's that transition that we have to deal with. Regulation, whether it can be a driver for where we're going, and really this whole point of needing to accelerate. Lastly, how businesses need to transition, need to do something to stay in business. Honestly, for me, that sounds very daunting. There's a lot of issues that we have to deal with, a lot of uncertainty. But I think in Hong Kong, we have very good organizations that are already looking at this. And one such organization is going to be NWD, under the leadership of Ellie and the sustainability program there. You guys have set the standard for quite a lot of initiatives. Can you tell us how NWD is anticipating or responding to some of the upcoming changes that you look at from COP26? And more importantly, Ben, you also talked about this, different sectors. So we're going to address multiple things with this question, because NWD is not just a property developer. You guys are a conglomerate across multiple sectors. So can you tell me a little bit more about how NWD is using the organization's platform to accelerate adaptation, adoption of ESG?
Thanks, Calvin. First of all, really excited to be here in person with such a great panel and see this amazing turnout. So yeah, you're absolutely right. New World Development is more than just a property developer. We are a diversified listed conglomerate. So I totally echo what Ben has just shared. I think if anything, the recent regulation, be it related to disclosure or climate related, actually has a lasting impact on not only the monitoring and the motivation for corporates to act on the environmental issues, but rather really thinking about the supply chain impact of climate issues and ultimately how we should meaningfully tie everything together and incorporate that into the entire company's risk management framework. I think, from a corporate's perspective, that's the end game. And to Calvin's question about how the post COP26 world has affected us or inspired us, I think there are a few things. It has confirmed our ongoing very bold direction to integrate all things ESG across the conglomerate. So a couple of years ago, actually about 4 years ago, we announced our Sustainability Vision 2030, which covers all of our diversified business. There were, targets set around green, wellness, and caring parameters. We disclose these every single year to our investors. We explain to them how we calculate our emissions intensity as the business mix changes. But as we, pay attention to new directions like TCFD on climate-related issues, And the general awareness, and especially in Hong Kong, for improving the livelihood and the community well-being. We have taken on creating shared value as our corporate mission in 2019. So all of these actions added together is to basically drive a more holistic approach of corporate sustainability, if you will. And we decided to basically take a deep dive into the way we drive our property and construction businesses, which, by the way, are the core revenue drivers of New World Group. So in doing so, we looked at TCFD's recommendation not only for inspiration to disclose our climate risk and opportunities, but to actually adopt, its strategy, the need to set metrics and targets around climate risk into the way we run our property business. So we have looked at our core development zone in the Greater Bay Area to understand, how climate resilient our existing buildings are. Some of the buildings are newer than the rest, but in any case, we have put on-site improvement measures, hardware upgrades, and enhanced management practices to ensure the people that we support on our property platform will be safe and will be protected in the future. And as an organization, to make sure we are well equipped to meet the challenges of future climate risk. So this is really important. But about COP26, I think there's a really loud and clear call to decarbonize as per the 1.5 degree scenario, right, by setting science-based targets. And not only that, while different countries, different governments, organizations are setting moonshot goals to, achieve carbon neutrality and net zero carbon, COP26 discussions provided more structure around how we should do that with integrity. Meaning, there should be some sort of a mitigation hierarchy, as they call it. So an organization is supposed to reduce its own carbon emissions up to about 90%, and then think about how to neutralize the remainder in achieving carbon neutrality. And the fact that New World in early 2021 has committed to setting 1.5 degree level of a science-based target by 2023, which we will achieve those targets by 2030. We're glad to know about this mitigation hierarchy and to see more organizations take on this challenge. We were the third Asia real estate company to commit to the 1.5 degree scenario, which is far from enough. There are a lot of our peers in Asia or in Hong Kong alone, and we look forward to seeing more and more developers doing the same. And how do we go about achieving science-based targets by 2030 and then carbon neutrality by 2050? We basically build upon our site-level work to reduce our own operational emissions, but the regulation or requirement of SBT as we know it also covers different supply chain players, right? So for buildings and construction businesses, we have to look into our construction embodied carbon. So this gives us more of an impetus to work with our construction suppliers, look into better materials, better designs, optimized designs to bring down our supply chain carbon. And in terms of our Scope 2 emissions from our electricity consumption, we also made a pledge to go 100% renewable energy for our rental properties. So talking about ESG integration, we pick rental properties because in the future of our group's revenue, majority of the contribution would come from rental properties. So that's why we pick this subset to drive our renewable energy goal. And last but not least, we need to work with our downstream players, our tenants, to bring down our emission. But just to sort of bring everything together. Of course, we know that when we drive change, when we effect different new environmental initiatives, we need capital. And the fact that we started standardizing our corporate strategy and implementing those strategies and policies and targets down to every single site gave us opportunities to look into green finance or sustainable finance, starting with our very first transaction in March of 2018. For a green loan for one of the world's first triple platinum green and healthy certified office buildings in Hong Kong. And most recently in January of 2021, we issued the world's first US dollar real estate developer sustainability linked bond with a target to drive our 100% renewable energy goal. So these are just some of the examples and benefits of why we should take note of these key directions, the outcomes from COP26, and how a corporation can start from zero and be very transparent. Like New World, we learn along the way. We've made mistakes. We work with different partners to drive change.
Ellie, thank you very much for setting essentially a blueprint for organizations to follow and kind of leapfrog the learning challenges and actually get up to speed that Ben's mentioned as well. Your point on green finance is quite interesting. You guys have been working on some interesting green finance instruments, and there's still a lot of innovation on the green finance side as well. So with that, I'd like to turn over to you, Francis. You guys, hope you can hear me. I'd like to turn over to you to give us some insight into the financial institutions will really play a key role in accelerating climate transitions. What is the role of green finance, sustainable finance? How is that important? How do you see that emerging? You yourself have been working on, I think it was 100 billion in green finance instruments. Can you share some of the innovations over at your institution that are supporting a climate transition?
Yeah, absolutely. So, great. Can you guys hear me now perfectly? Excellent. So let me first introduce me a little bit. So I am Francis Chen from the Industrial Bank headquarters based in Beijing. So basically we are a nationwide commercial bank. So and we actually start to focus on the idea of like the green finance or sustainable finance like for over a decade ago. So we adopt the cardinal principles in 2008-ish. And since then, we have been focusing on the green finance a lot, including the product innovation, like green service to our corporate clients, retail clients, etc. And also we became, I'd say, probably one of the largest green bond issuer in the world. But since green bond has been like talked about a lot in this day, so I'll probably skip the green bond parts and actually, since the China declared like a carbon peaking emission goals, we have seen a lot of like innovation, a lot of like I would say demands from our clients asking for more innovative financial products for them to realize their goals. So so I'll probably just jump to like a few cases or samples that I feel like quite innovative and something definitely everyone can take a look on and see whether these financial tools really fit their goals, whether to corporates or to other financial institutions. And the first one I like to mention is about like a green ABS or something, green ABS, or you can see the receivable financing, which I think the technical name is called the asset-backed commercial paper. So is first introduced in China, not like I would say one or two years ago. So let me start talking about some background information about how the renewable energy projects are priced in China, because these products actually use the subsidies of the renewable energy as underlying assets for the ABS. So basically in China, so if you have like a wind farm or the solar farm, so you get paid for per kilowatts the electricity you produce, and that's the price comes within two parts. The first one is a regular price, which is usually equal to the general price provided by the national power grid, and there's another one called the additional subsidy for the renewable energy, But for this part, the subsidy is usually cleared every year or every 2 years. So which give the renewable energy like project developer some financial pressures, because the subsidies, especially for some projects that are developed like I would say like 5 years ago, the subsidy because the subsidy usually counts for like 20% of the revenue, and if you get a revenue clear every once or every 2 years. It's a financial burden. So we come up with the idea that why not because these subsidies actually count as receivables on the balance sheet. So why not we use this as an underlying assets? So the underlying assets and the asset-backed commercial paper can be reissued like every half a year or once a year until the subsidies are fully paid. So this really helped the renewable energy developers to release their financial burden. So this product actually has been invented for over 5 years ago, but it got really popular in I would say this year, because there's lots of new products developed in the past 12 months. And probably I'll mention another cases is more related to we see the carbon financing, which use the emission rights or their derivatives as a way to finance. So there comes a concept with the carbon sink. I think everyone probably are familiar with that. It's kind of like projects that keep accumulating the CO2 in this lifespan. So there are basically two kinds of emission reduction. The first one is the one you commercialize already, which is some we call CER or VCS, whatever. So basically you can sell them in the carbon market. And another type is probably called the unrealized one, because they may be generated in the next 10 years or 20 years. So it cannot be commercialized right now. However, that's not fair for some certain types of projects like forestry, or like we say mangrove projects or wetland projects, because the time span of these projects are very long. They can exist for like 50 or 100 years, while most of the carbon sink are generated in a later period. So this brings a lot of financial pressure to the developer, because I have to invest in some projects that are going to just generate some profits in the next 50 years. So why not use these receivables, or we can use these receivables, or we can say derivatives, and we can use these collaterals to finance. So that's when we come up with this idea. We can sign up a repurchase agreement or whatever with the project developer. Says we make clear in the agreement says you need to have the good maintain of these like wetland or mangrove forestry, and we sign the repurchase agreement, which allows you to use the CER, which can be produced in the next 50 years as collaterals. So you can get finance right now, because that's a way to help you improve your liquidity, and so that you can invest more money into similar projects. So that's probably another very innovative cases I see in the past few months. There are lots of new cases I would like to share, but due to time limits, probably I'll give the floor back to you now, Calvin. Thanks.
Francis, thank you very much. Wetland restoration, carbon sinks, nature-related financial disclosures are typically not words in terms that we would expect to hear in the financial sector, but absolutely amazing in terms of letting us know where things are evolving, how things are developing. I think this will eventually come back to a question to you, Ben, on how do we deal with the legal issues with, let's say, measuring carbon sinks, the 50-year trajectory. But I'll get that to you later on. Let's change the focus a little bit. We've already set the scene. So what I'd like to do now is talk a little bit about setting the standards. And we have 3 very good examples of how standards are being set, monitored, and measured over time. Let me turn the time over to Tracy. Specifically on your question, I want to know, practicing what you preach is crucial. So not only do you support green finance, you literally wear green as well. Okay.
Yep.
Specifically, your organization hopes to influence its clients. Can you tell us a little bit more about what Standard Chartered Bank has done on this front? In particular, the details of your recently announced commitments.
Sure. I think I also want to say that throughout the day, we have heard a lot of tools, transition financing, different products, idea, etc. So I want to take the opportunity to share our experience, our approach, our thinking on really put a concrete case on what an FI, what a bank can do in really achieving the net zero. So as a bank, we fundamentally believe being the most responsible and sustainable bank is the right thing to do. So we integrate ESG criteria into all our lendings. And back in 2019, we did 19,000 assessment of with our clients on our stand. And as you have probably heard, and same as a lot of peers, we have made commitments in achieving operational net zero by 2030 and finance emissions net zero by 2050. So recently we came out with our own white paper, our own net zero methodology, sharing on how we calculate and our own finance emissions on our whole portfolio based on the 2020 number. And then we set interim target by 2030, what we need to do to achieve by then. So on our most high carbon intense sector, so for example, on our lending to coal and mining, we set a 85% reduction of absolute emission reductions by 2030. And for our power sector, we want to reduce our emission intensity by 63%. And for our oil and gas and for our steel and metal industry, we want to reduce this target by 30%. So it's a very ambitious target to hold ourselves to. In order for us to achieve our 2050 goal, we have set this 2030 interim target to hold ourselves accountable to. So with that, I also want to share about, how we're going to go. How we're going to go about this, right? So it's ambition target. So how are we going to go about this? So we are committed to set aside a $300 billion green and transition financing by 2030, and we are setting up a acceleration squad, essentially putting a pool of transition banker to help our clients to transition from our most intense carbon industry clients. And also, we need to continue to innovate new transition financing products. So we heard a lot already on loans and bonds. And we also heard earlier panel mentioning about SLB and New World's been also transacted on SLB, target setting financing. And also I want to mention, in addition to loans and bonds, this year we have rolled out a number of green and sustainable finance products, including ESG derivative, ESG repo, carbon trading, ESG advisory, transition advisory, and they are growing. We will continue to develop and make product available. Also, from the retail market, we also roll out green mortgages as well. So make sure that, we are not just driving from the large corporate, we also go addressing to SMEs, so sustainable trade that we roll out, and also to the retail market to make sure that all across the ecosystem can get access to green and sustainable financing. Now, also, I think I want to share impact as well. Okay, what does all this mean, right? What kind of impact a bank can make? So throughout last year, we were able to avoid 1.4 million tons of carbon emissions from our operating green asset. And over 500,000 of emissions were avoided from our green asset under construction. And also extending on microfinance, we issued 885,000 of them, and also SME financing. On top of that, of course, last 2 years been hard during COVID, the fact that we're all wearing masks and with this social distancing. So we have set up a $1 billion fund in helping to transport health equipment and also vaccine to where it's needed to fight climate change. So this is just example of what a bank can do. So what is the bottom line on this? So by the end of 2022, round the corner, we expect all our clients in the power generation, mining and metal sectors and oil and gas sector to have a strategy to transition their business in line with the goal of the Paris Agreement. And we know that our clients have very significant transition agenda in ESG focus, and we are here to help, and we want to work with you together to achieve that.
Tracy, absolutely amazing. I think in this situation, you've introduced us to a whole range of new ESG products from the finance side. And more importantly, I think you've emphasized the role that financial institutions play, not just about lending money, but lending it responsibly and helping organizations make that transition. A lot of the ESG products that we've seen so far have rightfully been focused on climate mitigation, carbon emissions, energy intensity, because that's really at the forefront of everybody's minds and thinking. But realistically, these are just a sliver of the environmental issues that we face. So now I'd like to turn the attention to Jean-Marc. This is something you've been working on beyond just climate issues. Can you tell me a little bit more about this? Specifically, you and WWF have started looking into the other applications of sustainable finance beyond just carbon emissions. Can you tell me a little bit more what this might mean for organizations in terms of the spectrum of financing that might be available, and how might we expect expectations from investors and other stakeholders to evolve on this issue?
Yes. Is this working? Okay. No, it's good. Okay. Thanks, Calvin. Yeah, I first want to just go back all the way back to Ben, and I want to reiterate his point on regulation. I can't say this enough. I mean, as a younger person, I was like Mr. Capitalist, didn't believe in regulation. But when it comes to this, when it comes to all the issues that we're facing right now, there couldn't be anything more needed than more regulation on climate issues, biodiversity issues. It can't be just left up to the private sector and banks to solve these issues. We need to have politicians in place, whether elected or not, that have the backbone to actually start making real decisions. We're running out of time. It's getting really serious and dangerous, and we need to move faster than we currently are. The private sector alone is not going to solve this issue, right? So with that, now I'm going to talk about the private sector and what they can do. But just want to make that point that we need more stronger government action. It's not acceptable at where we are now. So yeah, so Calvin, I mean, I just want to explain a little bit about what we're doing at WWF. Globally, we work in sustainable finance, the traditional stuff that we're all talking about right now. But recently, I say in the past 4 years or so, 3 years, the team I'm working with or on in Hong Kong and also in the Netherlands, we made a move to move away from just only sustainable finance, but into what we call development finance. So what that is essentially, I look at sustainable finance as advocacy, and it's trying to shift the entire system. And that's absolutely necessary and needed. But where I think an area that's been lacking and been overlooked is, it's there, and a lot of development banks do it and everything, but in the world of the private finance world, we're not really getting there yet, and we're trying to solve this issue, but it's really working on the ground projects. So who's actually doing the work to make the change, right? It's one thing to talk about policy, it's one thing to talk about, different carbon targets and everything, but who's actually making the change on the ground, right? And so Francis touched a little bit on this with the the wetland restoration, and that's exactly where I'm going to go with this. So what we want to do and what we're trying to do at WWF in this particular group, which we have coined and called Bankable Nature Solutions, is to start making conservation or the environment profitable. So let's leave the carbon aspect out for a second, but what we want to do is we want to have conservation projects or environmental projects that also have a business proposition. So what we do is we try to find projects that, I can get into examples later, but we try to find projects that are going to have strong impact on the ground, but also provide investors with a return, and a commercial rate of return, by the way, not some kind of subsidized return. So what we're trying to do, and the whole point of it, is to mobilize private sector capital. Because the issue that we have here is that right now there's about, I guess if you look at it in a measurement of sustainable development goals, in order to achieve those, just using that as a metric because it's easy to quantify, using that as a metric, we need about $4.5 trillion a year going into this type of work. Currently, we're at about 1.5, 1.7. So every year we have about a $2.5 trillion US dollar investment gap into this stuff. So you think about it though, you're like, okay, 1.7 trillion is not too bad. It sounds okay. It's a lot of money, right? But then you look at it and you compare it to global capital markets. Look at the debt, global commercial debt, right? You're talking 100 trillion or more. You look at equity markets, you're talking about 90 trillion. And then you look at just sovereign debt, it's somewhere in the 70 trillion or so. So, I mean, if we just take a bit of that and start putting it into conservation, well, or environmental work, it's a lot of money. So we can do a lot with that. So that's what we're trying to do. So we want to get that, and the only way we're going to do that, though, is to make conservation profitable or bankable. So back to what Francis was saying on restoring wetlands or mangroves. We typically call that nature-based solutions, and that's, I don't know if anyone's heard that, but it's a new term that's been coming up over the past year in the NGO world. I haven't heard it much in the financial sector, but that's what Francis was talking about. So nature-based solutions, typically, they can be bankable, but a lot of them are not. So a wetland restoration project typically won't be unless you tie around certain projects around that. But what he was talking about is how to finance that. And it's an interesting topic, and it's an interesting point. And I think we need more of that. But the issue I find, though, is not so much on the financing. The issue is on developing these projects in the first place. We need more projects. We need more effort and money going into the incubation of these projects. And we need more people working on this, because the biggest missing piece is not the money. I think it's all out there. And we heard after COP, 100 million committed here, 100 billion here, 50 billion there. The money's there. What we don't have are the projects. So we need to invest in the incubation of these projects. And that's exactly what we're trying to do. And we need more money to go into doing this. So, and then the other issue is that, while the wetland restoration and mangrove restoration are good, we're still behind the curve yet on methodology and how to come up with how do we even measure or verify these carbon offsets or credits, whatever we're trying to do. So that's still out there. So we still have a lot of work to go in that space. But I think Francis is really onto something there, and I think it's something we should discuss further at another point. But yeah, I just want to make that clear. But so where can banks act and where can they get involved? Well, they can get involved in this. So I'm talking to several asset managers, financial institutions, i.e. banks, and how we can work on these type of products together. Now, they're not, typically you would need, project finance teams in place that know how to do this. But it's doable, and it can be packaged for many different type of investors. So those are the kind of things that I think we are aiming to do. We're moving less, I guess, away from the typical, mainstream, like we mentioned when it was introduced, the Climate Impact Asia Fund, which is a great fund that we've set up, but it's an listed equity fund. But we need to move more into the actual direct conservation project work. And I think what we're trying to accomplish with Bankable Nature Solutions is exactly that.
So the theme of this topic today is innovation, nature-based solutions. So if you haven't heard it, this is the first time you've heard it here today. This is going to tie very closely with Task Force on Nature-related Financial Disclosures, which I believe the finance sector is pushing. So there is going to be a lot of alignment on the nature side of things. So this goes beyond just climate, it goes beyond just carbon. But one word that kept on popping up, Jean-Marc, in your discussion is measuring, monitoring. We need to do this, but we need to monitor. We need to measure progress. How do we get this done? So this question then goes to Bill. This is something that you've been working on. We need to be able to monitor, measure progress. You have been working on this with Allinfra. How might your solutions be able to help us with monitoring and measuring progress?
Sure, thanks, Calvin. And before I get into that, I just want to just reference, comment about the 50, 100 billion and trillions that are being allocated to climate finance. I remember we set up our first carbon trading platform in 2004. And, as a kind of new entrant to that market, I heard some banks announce, 1 billion, 4 billion targets in climate finance. And I thought, look, that's job done. Billions of dollars going into climate finance. And then there was a 30 billion announcement. And I thought, look, I'm out of a career, climate solve. But it's incredible how big the scale of the opportunity, to Ben's point before, but also the challenge. And I love, Francis, what you were mentioning about, sort of structured products to enable projects to generate future emission reductions. Some of the most successful carbon financings that I've done over the years are financing against future emission reductions, whether that was advance payments on 4 or 5 year out emission reductions, or paying option premiums today for future emission reductions from assets that will generate those reductions in the future. So love to hear what everyone's up to. I know many of these folks, but on these panels, you get to hear a little bit more about what people are up to. It's really exciting. So something I want to emphasize is that, climate markets, whether it's related to evidencing what an asset's achieving or a corporate's achieving, or unlocking high quality environmental finance, is very much underpinned by good quality data. The ability to take that data, bring it forward in a way that the market trusts, and the way it can, in a way it can be usable in the financial markets. And it's not, environmental financing and realizing value, it's not like a physical cargo that shows up on rail or by ship. It's a data story. It's evidencing that some environmental impact has happened at some place, at some point in time, and the ability for the market to see that in the form of an instrument. And so in the early carbon markets, and even up until recently, the process for doing that was very manual. Having site visits, collecting data, having that data transcribed into reports, and those reports were often for a single use case. So if you look at the landscape of environmental finance relevant activity, carbon accounting, ratings, green bonds, green financing, product, carbon credits, RECs, a lot of that relies on the same core backbone of carbon data. And yet historically, it would take us 3 to 6 or sometimes 9 months to gather that data, and it would result in a product that was usable for one of those use cases, not multiple use cases. So around about 2016 or 17, with Paris Agreement signed, I was looking at the various pain points in the Kyoto markets and realizing that tech that is available today could be utilized to really unlock a lot of value, reduce risk, create efficiency, and create optionality in the carbon finance market. And so essentially what we do is, and this is where the market's going generally for carbon accounting and ratings and even things like green bonds, is taking that process for gathering data that allows one to show that this asset is, let's say, above and beyond the business as usual. It's reducing emissions relative to the business as usual case. It allows you to take that data in a much cheaper, more efficient and digital format, and really have that data accessible for the moment you need it. So rather than, okay, there's a buyer or there's a lender that's interested in my assets, rather than that being the beginning of a 3, 6, or 9 month process, you've got that data immediately available directly from the meter or from the device in a digital format that can be traced back from collection to legal transfer of an instrument to retirement and making a claim. And that's permanently relatable back to a specific asset at a moment in time. So that's some of the, I guess, the thinking that we had around the problem we were solving. And what we do as as Calvin mentioned before is, some of the tools that we use are blockchain based. So what we do is that data that we collect generally every 2 minutes is collected onto a private chain. That data is by permissioned access only, so it's reliable, it's trusted, but you can create permissioned access to your accountants, to your ratings agency, or make that available to the market at large. But it gives you that optionality to then convert that data and convert your activity into a financial product. So maybe now bringing it to something that's a bit more Hong Kong based. Some of you may have seen the announcements related to Project Genesis. So Project Genesis is an initiative that's sort of quarterbacked by the Bank of International Settlements and the Hong Kong Monetary Authority. And that project is about taking blockchain and taking what would be a traditional green bond, and rather than going through a traditional process of issuance and data verification, what it does is it uses blockchain to create a digital representation of, in this case, a bond, but just as well equity, debt, or hybrid exposure to an environmental asset. And that tradable digital asset is then very accessible to a wider market. And then using the blockchain data collection to then inform that asset that the asset's performing in accordance with the green bond provisions. So that's Project Genesis. That's really a kind of setting a prototype or a template for how that could be done. And for us, we've got clients in the natural capital space, doing, generating nature-based solutions related to, grassland rehabilitation, forestry, some really interesting, emerging projects in the oceanography space, but pulling that together with renewable developers, where you're able to take large-scale financing opportunities with renewable and grassland rehabilitation combined, issue a digital debt instrument against that, and that debt instrument getting either reporting or even some financial benefit related to the emission reductions that are achieved. And the importance of all this is that one of the most commonly cited reasons back when Kyoto, I don't like to sort of describe it this way, but essentially collapsed in 2011 and into 12, was the fact that the data collection and the verification process was entirely unpredictable, excessive in cost. And if you imagine now a financer or a trader sitting in the middle, you've got liquidated damages or potentially government penalties on the other side if you're late in your emission reductions. So that was one of the main reasons that, whether it was corporates or financial institutions, sort of, in my view, threw the baby out with the bathwater a little bit by saying, look, this is all too hard, this crediting mechanism, the way in which you relate finance to environmental outcomes. It was painful, and it still kind of is, but much of that market is moving digital. Really excited about that, and that's where I see a lot of acceleration of impact, acceleration of outcomes, coming in the next few years.
Bill, thank you very much. So this, what I'm taking from this: transparency, auditability, verifiability, and all this leads to trust in the carbon markets that we need to be establishing. And this is something that you and Allinfra have been working on, and I look forward to learning more from how these developments come up in the near future. I will like to turn the time quickly to some questions that we might have from the audience. So here's one question, and it's going to be revolving around nature-based solutions. So I probably let JM try to answer this, or Francis, perhaps you as well. It's more of a comment. It's, aren't nature-based solutions contingent on a big, well-functioning, i.e. price carbon market to create demand for these solutions? How would you respond to that?
I would say yes and no is the answer. I mean, it's certainly helpful, but you can have carbon offsetting without a secondary market, right? I mean, these can be primary products. You don't necessarily have to have a trading market. In fact, I think it probably is better if these things weren't tradable in a lot of ways. So it's certainly, that doesn't apply. I think, with carbon trading, you're talking more about, it's different from what we're talking about with nature-based solutions. So, it's the cap and trade system with trading, and different companies have different quotas. What we're talking about here is land or some kind of resource where it sequesters carbon that a company can then use and then hold on to. Of course, they can sell them at some point, yes, but the idea is that I don't necessarily think that might not be a good thing to have those traded in the market. But yeah, but also at the same time, I think nature-based solutions aren't necessarily, they all don't have to be revolved around carbon. Some of them are, yes, but a lot of them can have their own revenue source as well. And again, happy to explain examples of that. But, or let me just take an example of that. Well, I don't want to go on too long on this, but, we're working on a project in India that has its own product in and of itself. You can add on the carbon offsetting to that. But if you look at, it's a group that we're looking at. So basically what they're doing is they're taking rice paddy straw waste or agricultural waste, putting that through an anaerobic digester, and then generating energy from that. And then they can then sell that to whoever needs that energy. So that doesn't necessarily need carbon offsets. Now you can add carbon offsets to that, but you don't necessarily have to have that. So I would say the answer is yes and no. And yeah, maybe if you want to have Francis elaborate.
Francis, did you have thoughts on this? So it was about nature-based solutions, carbon market.
Yeah, maybe I just talk about for a couple of minutes, because I personally do think they are kind of like related, because if you want to really connect the nature-based solution to the carbon market, I would say probably the link between them is through the CER, certificate emission reduction-ish, because that's actually a very good way. CER is a very good way to quantify what's actually the benefit from those nature-based solutions or ish. However, like as we know, most of the carbon markets, the 95% of the item traded in there is carbon allowance. It's not the CER. So because we've seen in the European market before, when there's too much CER in the market, basically the carbon markets collapse. So it's a very delicate market to determine how much of the CER allowed to be used in the carbon market and to be used to fulfill the emission like to fulfill the gap between the emission allowance and what government require from the emission projects. So that's a very delicate one, and it's basically a man-made market. So I would say it's related. However, just we need to be really careful about how it works, because if you don't allow any CRs in the carbon market, you basically just penalize what's the heavy emissioner, but however not giving enough rewards to those who do a lot of job in cutting their emissions. But if you allow too much CR in the market, it will just disrupt the market. So that's something just come out to my mind. They're really related, but have to be carefully treated.
Can I just add, just on pricing, and one of our shareholders has been doing nothing but nature-based carbon since 1997, and we work with a lot of players in that space. The pricing for those type of emission reductions has gone up, depending on which market, between 5 and 15x in the past 2 years. And so whilst it is, there are lots of niche markets, and depending on whether it's a compliance or voluntary instrument, a lot of variability, but generally speaking, the demand for those instruments and the interest that players are sort of showing in terms of buying futures and buying emission reductions that generate new assets and new projects is growing significantly. So it's pretty exciting to see the market start to price it properly.
I'm going to jump in as well because everyone else has. The theme for this session is, or excuse me, for today's event is sort of financing the sort of net zero. And so, finance is, of course, at the heart of, what we do at GFA and all of the sessions today. This particular panel, of course, is about innovation. And innovation and finance, I mean, we need new ideas. We've heard some, cool ideas today. There are plenty more out there, whether they're carbon-based or nature-based or XYZ-based. The key thing, though, as we try to accelerate the sort of asset classes and different ways to raise green capital, the key thing is always we have to keep a very close eye on quality, because it's very easy to get carried away with innovation. And innovation, of course, can be at all sorts of levels: a tech innovation, a data collection innovation, just the new ideas innovation, regulatory innovation, so on and so forth. But what we all have to do as sort of participants in this market, whether as advisors or buyers or sellers or issuers, lenders, whatever it may be, is to only insist on high quality, only insist on, or insist rather only on high quality, insist only on high integrity assets. Okay, and that requires, of course, a lot of support, a reasonable amount of science, but it's really important. The climate, and we're focused on climate, of course, but the stated climate benefits have to be verifiable throughout the lifespan of the project.
Thank you very much for that. I keep on hearing the word accelerate. And that's kind of ironic coming from a lawyer that charges probably by the 15 minutes. I never thought we would hear accelerate from that side. But in line with that theme, we're coming up to the home stretch, and I would like to transition towards accelerating change. And this question is going to be both for Ellie and Tracy. On both of your sides, both of your organizations play a key role in accelerating the uptake of ESG, climate transition. Ellie, on your side, you briefly introduced the shared value lease. Tracy, on your side, I believe you've been working with the private equity side on accelerating transitions as well. Can both of you elaborate a little bit more on how you're working with your stakeholders on doing this?
Sure, maybe I'll start first. So to your point about the shared value lease, it's essentially highlighted, but the urgency of doing this is highlighted by our commitment to achieving science-based target and to work with our supply chain players. And in the building sector, as I mentioned earlier, would be our tenants' emission. So as a landlord, simply put, we have an obligation to reduce the carbon footprint of our entire building. But not only that, we have to look after our upstream and downstream as well. But traditionally speaking, as we know in the real estate market, it would be quite difficult to hold tenants accountable for the total energy consumption of their daily operation. Again, it goes back to partially the lack of data granularity, and secondly, a lack of incentive. So I'm sure a lot of us in the audience have thought about the idea of a green lease, which essentially is, a term or clause as part of the tenancy agreement or the general contract between the landlord and the tenant. And upon achieving certain agreed environmental performance indicators by the tenants, then they would be rewarded either through rental concession or management fee reduction or some other forms of reward. And at New World, we have our own currency because we are a growing ecosystem with retail, with hospitality, with different businesses across Greater China. So we decided to sort of marry the two concepts, our currency and a green lease, to turn into what we call the CSV, Creating Shared Value Lease. So essentially, we are launching the CSV lease at our office buildings in Hong Kong first, with a phased expansion plan for retail projects across Greater China. So new and existing tenants are both welcome to sign this CSV lease. And the lease's components basically include both energy reduction, waste management, so those cover the green part of sustainability. But more importantly, we understand that a lot of our multinational corporation office tenants, and in the future, luxury brand retail tenants, or even young brands that are just renting a shop for the first time, also have the need to raise the social sustainability awareness of their employees and their VIP clients. So we want to make this sort of a next level offering from the landlord to save our tenants, our customers, some headaches when they come and rent New World's property. We will facilitate them to fit out their space in a more sustainable way, facilitate them to save energy, reduce waste, engage employees with a reward of K dollars. And the currency will be given to the employees of the tenants, not only the leasing contact or the head of the company. So in a way, it's a win-win-win for everybody. So I guess this is a small example and a way in which we're able to innovate, not only for meeting science-based target level of decarbonization requirements, but also to strengthen the leasing proposition, which drives our business at the end of the day. But another just quick example of how we accelerate different partners using our platform is to form this B2B startup accelerator. So I mentioned earlier that we have a sustainability vision 2030 with overarching goals. Some of them are very ambitious, and of course we know the need to even to reach these goals even faster than we had planned. So a way in which we do that is to start Impact Commons, which is Hong Kong's first UN Sustainable Development Goal aligned accelerator 2 years ago. The mission of Impact Commons is really simple. Essentially, we go around New World and identify different challenges from business units and meeting our sustainability targets or raising sustainability awareness. And at the same time, we go around to shop for startup solutions and we match them. So very quickly, just between two cohorts, we generated 26 different integrations ranging from rescuing waste plastic from retail tenants to turn into a circular umbrella for sale to raise awareness of climate actions, to some more technical solutions like repurposing construction waste into biochar and other materials. So yeah, I do believe that technology or not necessarily technology, just innovative ideas have a role to play in sustainability.
Thank you, Ali. I was so much looking forward to hearing the latest, the green lease just launched from New World, And if you recall the earlier report from the green building research, we highlight one of the pain points is the inefficiency between the tenants and the owners' allocation of the benefits. So I think that I have big hope, and I'm really happy to see that, coming out to the market, leading the way. I hope to see a lot more in that space. And before I go on to the transaction, I also want to point out, in responding to Bill, the Project Genesis, one of the key features that I like is the using technology and data to provide that live environmental benefit of what your money is spending on getting that environmental benefit live on your on your phone, is super cool. So I look forward to seeing that in the market, hopefully very soon.
May I?
Yes.
I agree with everything you said and everything he said. Project Genesis was fantastic. I think, before we started writing Project Genesis report, we kind of knew what the conclusions were going to be. And so for people that are not familiar with the report, the project, it was to explore the feasibility of issuing a sovereign green bond in sort of digital tokenized format for retail investment. Okay, and I think we looked at it from a technical feasibility, we looked at it from a practical feasibility, and frankly, those of us, before we started, we knew it was going to be feasible. Okay, so it's great, and read it.
So it's happening.
The challenge we have now is that there is no pathway in Hong Kong to bring retail digital green investment products to market. No practical pathway. So innovation is ideas, is technology, finance, but it's also innovation amongst the key decision makers, and in a finance context, of course, that includes some of our regulators.
I have big hope that we will see that come into life very soon. So going back to answer your questions on one of the transactions I want to share, which I think sort of summarize and articulate on today's on the ESG and carbon. So Kelvin, thanks for bringing up. So we just transacted one of the world first sustainability-linked financing for a private equity firm to help them to set their own investment target on their underlying company on the ESG and with a carbon mechanism built into it as well. So the E is on the GHG emissions on their underlying company throughout the life of the borrowing. Going back to sustainability-linked loan structure, our earlier panel spoke a lot on the SLB, on the bond, very similar. And in fact, sustainability-linked structure can be applied to derivative, repo, etc. But on the loan, just to articulate, so the borrower are required to predetermine their target on what kind of sustainability strategy or their carbon emission target that they want to set throughout the life of their trade. And every year, when you present this target to the lender, you can get a pricing incentive if you are exceeding or you're meeting your target, or the other way, getting a penalty. So the differences between the European market and Asian market is that in the European market, typical SLL structure are both sided. So you have an incentive and also have a penalty. However, in Asia, so far that we have seen 90% above one-sided incentive only. But we are seeing the market changing in that space. Going back to the deal on this SLL fund subscription funds that we just did. On the E is linked to the carbon emission. On the S, we link to the gender, so gender diversity. On the underlying companies, female ratio board, every single one that you invested in. And then on the G, so this is this target is about how to enhance their governance diligence structure when they invest into this underlying company. So that if you achieve this target, then you get a pricing incentive. And on this other side, if you fail to achieve that, then the borrower will commit to purchase carbon credit, carbon offset as a penalty on the structure. So
I have to say this, it's so easy to moderate a panel when it flows so naturally. I said at the very beginning that it is truly my honor to sit here and be able to learn from each and every one of you, and I've learned quite a bit already. The first is that regulation, each one of you have mentioned this, it's coming, and the need to accelerate for businesses to transition in order to stay in business. The second one is about the collaboration side. How do we work together with different organizations, as Ellie has pointed out? Innovation. We're looking at nature-based solutions, not just about carbon management, as Jean-Marc and Francis, both of you, have been able to share on. We've talked about standard setting, Tracy, with your most recent example about how do you raise the benchmark for future issuers and borrowers. We've talked about the application of fintech and build how this is going to help improve auditability, accountability, and verifiability so that we have trust in the carbon management system. It has truly been an honor to sit here and learn from each and every one of you. I expect to be able to continue to do that. With that, I have 30 seconds left. I think we can end early and go to drinks.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much for sitting here and listening to this panel.
Thanks.
Thank you.